Have you ever been told you were too fat, too big, too plain, too unworthy of love? Have you ever carried a suitcase of hope across miles only to be abandoned at the very place where you dreamed life would begin? This is Clara's story. A woman mocked, rejected, left standing alone on the wooden platform of a Wyoming station. Her family turned their backs. Strangers laughed at her body, and in that moment, the weight of her whole life's sorrow pressed down harder than the coal smoke hanging in the air. But here's the question: after such cruelty, after being branded too fat to marry, could her story possibly turn into one of belonging, of love, of finally being seen for who she truly was? What happened when a cowboy's little girl whispered one word "mama" into Clara's shattered silence? The Wyoming wind had no mercy. It scraped across the barren plains, carrying grit and whispers as sharp as knives. The noon train screeched to a halt, belching steam, and the crowd of men shifted forward, their eyes scanning the women who stepped down with nervous hands clutching suitcases. Among them was Clara, 50 years old, round in figure, dressed in a plain blue dress she had mended 3 times already. In her chest, a fragile hope beat louder than the engine's wheels. She had crossed half the country to meet a man who had promised her a home, a chance to matter again. But when her feet touched the platform, she knew he wasn't there. Instead, a clerk cleared his throat, waving a folded letter. From Mr. Hale, he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice stumbled, then hardened, as if the words themselves stung his tongue. "She is too fat. I cannot marry such a woman. Tell her to go back east." The silence broke like glass. A few men chuckled under their breath. A woman smirked and turned away. Someone muttered, "Poor fool, thought she had a chance." Clara stood frozen, suitcase slipping from her hand. Her throat burned, but no tears came. Tears had been trained out of her long ago. She swallowed her shame like poison, her eyes fixed on the ground. She whispered to herself, though no one cared to hear, "Why must my body always speak louder than my heart?" As she stooped to gather her spilled belongings, a small spool of thread rolled across the platform. Before she could reach it, a pair of tiny hands picked it up. She looked down into the wide, innocent eyes of a little girl. The child pressed the spool into her palm and whispered soft as prayer, "Mama." The crowd went still again. A cowboy approached, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing a face lined by years of weather and grief. Thomas. He looked not at her figure, not at the mocking eyes around them, but at her weary, unbroken gaze. "Ma'am," he said gently, his voice steady as a river, "do you have a place to go?" Clara could only shake her head. The little girl clung tighter to her skirt. Thomas rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder, and with quiet certainty said aloud for all to hear, "Then ride with us. She may just be the one we need." And in that moment, between cruel laughter and a stranger's invitation, the story of Clara's second chance began. If humiliation can be shouted in public, can dignity be restored in silence? If a cruel letter can end one life, can a child's whisper begin another? The wagon wheels groaned against the frozen dirt road, each turn carrying Clara farther from the station and its cruel laughter. She sat stiffly on the wooden bench, her old suitcase pressed against her knees, as though it could shield her from the stares still burning in her memory. Beside her, Thomas's daughter, Lily, leaned close, her little hand still clutching Clara's sleeve, as if afraid she might vanish. The child had said that one word "mama" so naturally, as though it had always belonged to her lips. The echo of it haunted Clara's chest, both painful and sweet. Thomas sat at the reins, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the trail. He did not speak. He did not need to. The steady rhythm of the horses, the creak of leather, the wind sifting through dry grass, these filled the silence between them. Yet in that silence, Clara felt something unfamiliar: safety. Her mind, however, would not rest. What if he changes his mind? What if this is pity and tomorrow I'm sent away like rubbish at the edge of town? At last, her voice, brittle and trembling, broke the quiet. "Why? Why did you do it back there? Why say those words?" Thomas glanced at her, his eyes calm but steady, because they were true. Her heart sank until he added softly, "Not what was written in that letter. What I said, that you may be the one we need." Clara's breath caught. He continued, his voice low and honest, shaped by grief. "My boys lost their mother 3 winters ago. Lily barely remembers her. And me, He hesitated, the reins pulling slightly in his calloused hands. I wasn't looking for a wife, not really. But I was looking for someone who could be here. Someone steady. Someone who understands what it means to lose and still keep going. Clara turned away, eyes stinging. She had never been called steady before. She had only been called too fat or not enough. As the wagon topped a rise, the ranch appeared below a modest wooden house, smoke curling from its chimney, a small barn with one side patched in mismatched planks. Cattle scattered across the field. It was not grand, but it breathed of endurance. When they stopped, Lily hopped down first and tugged Clara's hand. "Come see Mama," she whispered again, so certain, so unafraid. Clara's knees trembled as she stepped onto the ground. For years, she had been the one left behind, the one unchosen. And now this child, without hesitation, had chosen her. Inside the cabin, warmth wrapped around her, roaring firelight, the smell of beans simmering, the faint creak of a rocking chair. On the mantel stood a framed daguerreotype, a younger woman, fair and bright-eyed. Thomas's late wife. Clara lowered her gaze, guilt twisting in her chest. "I could never take her place," she murmured. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face shadowed by lamplight. "I don't ask you to," he said simply. "I only ask that you be yourself. That's enough." For the first time in years, Clara felt the possibility that it might be true. That night, as Lily curled up in Clara's lap and drifted into sleep, Thomas watched silently. His eyes said what words could not, that this stranger, mocked, abandoned, humiliated, might just be the missing piece of their broken family. When the world calls you unworthy, what does it mean to be told you are enough? Can a woman abandoned on a platform find not just shelter, but a home? The days that followed were unlike anything Clara had known in years. Morning light spilled across the ranch, turning frost into silver lace. She rose early, her hands eager to help, yet her heart wary of stepping too far into a life that wasn't yet hers. Thomas never pressed her. He worked long hours in the fields, fixing fence lines, chopping wood, tending the cattle. When he returned, his silence was not cold but thoughtful. His words, when they came, were simple, yet each one felt chosen, honest. It was Lily who bridged the distance. "Mama, will you braid my hair?" Mama read this story again. "Mama, can you sing like the old songs?" Each time the little girl spoke that word, Clara's heart swelled and broke at once. She wanted to claim it, to believe it belonged to her, but fear whispered otherwise. At supper one evening, as Clara ladled stew into bowls, Thomas cleared his throat. "You don't have to do all this," he said. Clara froze, wooden spoon hovering. "Do you not want me to?" His gaze softened. "I mean, you don't have to prove yourself. You're welcome here, whether or not the stew's on the table." Her hands trembled. For so long, every act of care had been a desperate bargain for approval, husbands, family, neighbors. Now this man told her she needn't earn her place. She could scarcely believe it. But not all voices in town were as kind. When Clara ventured to the mercantile for flour and soap, the whispers followed. "Isn't that the one left at the station?" Thomas called her, took her in. "What's he thinking? Poor man must have been desperate." Clara kept her chin high, but inside the old wounds tore open. She returned to the ranch quiet, her smile brittle. That night, Thomas noticed. "They said something, didn't they?" His voice was low, steady. Clara shook her head, unwilling to burden him. But he reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "Clara," he said gently, "let them talk. They don't know you. They don't know what it means to survive what you have." Her eyes stung with tears she dared not shed. She whispered almost too softly to hear, "But what if you change your mind too?" The silence stretched, broken only by the crack of firewood. Thomas leaned forward, his voice steady as a vow. "I don't take back what I say. I meant it. You are the one we need." The words settled into Clara's heart like a stone dropped into deep water. Heavy, undeniable. Later that night, when she tucked Lily into bed, the child clutched Clara's hand. "Don't leave, Mama," she murmured. "Please stay." Clara kissed her brow, whispering a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll stay, Lily. I'll stay." But in her own room alone, beneath the patchwork quilt, Clara lay awake. Shadows flickered on the ceiling, echoing doubts she could not silence. Could she truly belong here? Or was this fragile piece only borrowed time before the world's cruelty returned? When a heart has been broken too many times, can it trust words spoken with gentleness? Or will Clara's fear keep her from embracing the home opening before her? The first snow came earlier than expected. It swept down from the mountains, blanketing the plains in a thick, bitter silence. Clara stood by the window of her small room, watching the flakes dance in the lantern light. Each one seemed so fragile, yet together they covered the world. She envied them. Alone she was weak, but together with someone, could she truly belong? In the weeks since she had stepped off that train, life on Thomas's ranch had settled into a rhythm. The mornings began with the crow of the rooster, the hiss of coffee on the stove, and Lily's bright chatter. Clara mended clothes, baked bread, taught Lily her letters. In the evenings, Thomas returned from the fields weary but steady, and they ate together at the long wooden table. Yet peace is often fragile as snow melting on the palm. One evening, Clara walked into town alone. The pantry was low and she needed flour. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her shawl wrapped tightly around her. But the mercantile was crowded that day. Men buying nails, women buying thread, children tugging at their skirts. As she stepped inside, silence fell for a breath too long. Then came the whisper. "That's her, the fat one left at the station. I heard her own kin abandoned her. No wonder. She's living with Thomas Calder now. Poor fool. Doesn't he know better?" Clara kept her head high, but their words clung like burrs to her heart. When she laid her coins on the counter, the shopkeeper, a thin man with a narrow mouth, smirked. "Running Thomas's household already. Guess desperate men don't get to be choosy." Heat flooded her face. She wanted to shout to defend herself. Instead, she gathered her flour and walked away. Her pride told her not to run, but inside shame twisted like a knife. That night back at the ranch, Clara tried to hide her hurt. She hummed while cooking supper, braided Lily's hair, even laughed at the girl's silly stories. But Thomas saw it in her eyes. When Lily was tucked into bed, Thomas lingered by the fire. He looked at Clara long and steady. "They said something in town, didn't they?" Clara stiffened. "It doesn't matter." "Yes, it does." His voice was quiet but firm. She turned finally, letting the words spill like water, breaking a dam. "They called me fat. They called me unwanted. They said you were a fool for taking me in." Her voice cracked. "And perhaps they're right. Perhaps you will see it too one day and cast me aside like all the rest." The silence after her confession felt unbearable. Clara stood trembling, waiting for his rejection. But Thomas rose, slowly crossed the room, and stopped before her. His hands, scarred from years of labor, cupped her shoulders. His eyes were steady, deep as the mountain pools after rain. "Clara," he said, each word deliberate, "I am not them. I know what I see. You are not a burden. You are not a mistake. You are the woman who fills this house with warmth, who gives my daughter hope, who has strength greater than most men I know. I don't care what they say. I care what I see." Her breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. She had held them back for so long, damned behind years of scorn, abandonment, and betrayal. Now in Thomas's presence, the dam broke. She wept not from shame, but from release. Thomas didn't pull away. He let her weep, his hand steady at her back. When at last her sobs subsided, he spoke again. "Clara, I don't want a ghost of someone else's approval. I want you, as you are." The words carved themselves into her heart deeper than any cruelty ever had. Still doubt lingered like a shadow. Days later, while Clara hung laundry to dry in the icy wind, a rider approached. It was Martha Keene, a widow from town, who had long set her sights on Thomas. She reined her horse close and dismounted, her smile sharp as a blade. "You must be Clara," Martha said, eyes sweeping over her figure. "I've heard plenty. Strange, isn't it? A woman left behind like a forgotten trunk, suddenly thinking she belongs here." Clara's hands tightened on the clothespins, but she kept silent. Martha stepped closer, her tone laced with poison. "Don't fool yourself. Thomas is kind, yes, but kindness isn't love. And when he comes to his senses, you'll be alone again. Mark my words." The sting of her words nearly stole Clara's breath. But before she could answer, a small voice piped up. "Mama?" It was Lily, running from the porch, holding a doll Clara had sewn for her. She hugged Clara's waist and looked up, beaming. "Papa says supper's ready." Martha's smirk faltered. Clara bent, smoothing Lily's hair, her voice steady, though her heart thundered. Thank you, darling. Let's go in. She turned her back on Martha without another word. For once, she did not feel crushed. She felt stronger. Not because the cruelty had lessened, but because Lily's innocent love had given her courage. That night, as Clara served supper, Thomas noticed the light in her eyes. He didn't ask what had happened. He only nodded slightly as if to say, I see you. I trust you. For the first time, Clara felt the stirrings of something dangerous, something she had long believed impossible: hope. But hope can be fragile too. Will Clara's fragile new courage survive when her past comes calling, and when the town tests her place in Thomas's home even further? Winter in Montana did not come quietly. It came with the roar of the wind, the crack of frozen branches, the shriek of snow tearing across the prairie. Clara had thought herself familiar with loneliness, but the ranch changed her rhythm. She woke early, kneaded bread while the fire burned low, and hummed soft tunes as Lily played at her feet. She stitched the boys' shirts, stirred pots of stew, and read psalms aloud in the evenings. But even as warmth grew in her days, shadows followed her. One morning when the snow eased enough for travel, Thomas asked Clara to come with him into town for supplies. At first she hesitated. The memory of whispers at the mercantile, the sting of Martha Keene's words still clung to her like frostbite. But Thomas simply said, "You belong at my side, Clara." And so she went. The wagon wheels groaned as they rolled through town. Heads turned. Men tipped hats out of respect for Thomas, then let their eyes slide toward Clara with thinly veiled curiosity. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Clara straightened her shoulders, gripping her shawl tighter. Inside the mercantile, the air was thick with dust and kerosene. Thomas gathered nails, flour, and lantern oil. Clara busied herself with cloth bolts near the back, hoping to be invisible. But she was not invisible. "Well, if it isn't the bride no one wanted," a voice drawled. It belonged to Edwin Blake, a rancher with too fat money and too little kindness. He leaned against the counter, smirking. "Heard you were left standing at the station like a stray pup. Guess Thomas here is generous enough to take in strays." The words struck like a lash. Clara froze. Her instinct was to shrink, to let shame bury her. But before she could answer, Thomas set down the sack of flour with a heavy thud. Edwin Thomas said evenly, "Best watch your tongue." The room stilled. Thomas's voice was low, but it carried a weight that silenced the murmurs. Edwin chuckled, but his smirk faltered. "Didn't mean offense? Just speaking truth." Thomas's jaw tightened. He stepped closer. "Truth is, this Clara runs my home, feeds my children, and brings more strength to my table than any man I know. You'd do well to remember that." The mercantile owner cleared his throat, and the moment broke. Edwin muttered something under his breath and slunk away. But Clara's hands shook as she clutched the cloth bolt. Later in the wagon, she whispered, "Why did you defend me like that?" Thomas glanced at her, puzzled. "Because it was right. But you heard him. You heard them all. I was abandoned, left behind." "I don't care who left you," Thomas said firmly. "I care that you stayed, that you didn't let it break you." His words warmed her like a hearth in winter, but doubt still gnawed. Would his faith hold when the whispers grew louder? A week later, while Clara was sweeping the porch, a rider approached. He carried a folded paper sealed with wax. "For Mrs. Clara," he said, tipping his hat. She frowned. Few people wrote her. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. The words inside chilled her more than any snow. "Clara, I write not to wound, but to remind you of your place. Do not bring shame upon Thomas Calder. A woman like you is a burden, not a blessing. Leave before you take more than you give." No name was signed. Clara sank onto the porch step, the broom falling from her hand. Shame, old and familiar, rose like a tide. Had someone from her past found her? Or was this simply the cruelty of the town? Either way, it clawed at her fragile sense of belonging. When Thomas returned that evening, he found her still pale, the letter crumpled in her fist. She tried to hide it, but he took it gently from her hand, read it once, then, without hesitation, tossed it into the fire. Flames curled the paper to ash. "Cowards write such things," he said quietly. "Not people worth fearing." "But what if they're right?" Clara whispered. Thomas crouched, meeting her eyes. "Clara, listen to me. My boys need you. I need you. Not for what you look like, not for what you've suffered, but because you are you, and that is enough. Her throat tightened. For years, no one had said she was enough. But the past has sharp claws. One bitter morning, a stranger arrived at the ranch. He was tall with a long coat dusted in frost and eyes that Clara recognized instantly. Her brother. The same brother who had abandoned her at the station. Her blood turned to ice. "Clara," he said stiffly, "I've come to take you home." Thomas Wary stepped beside her. "She has a home." Her brother's jaw clenched. "Not here. Not with you." "Clara, don't you see? You're embarrassing yourself. The family talks. You're living as charity." Clara's knees nearly buckled. Every cruel word, every dismissal rushed back like a flood. She wanted to retreat into silence as she always had, but then she felt a small hand slip into hers. Lily. The little girl looked up, her blue eyes filled with innocent trust. "Mama." The word rang like a bell. Clara drew a deep breath. For once she didn't shrink. She lifted her chin, turned to her brother, and said, "No, I am not leaving. Not again. You left me once at that station, and I nearly believed I deserved it." But here her voice steadied. "I am wanted, needed. I am not your burden. I am their family." Thomas's hand brushed her shoulder, steadying her. Lily squeezed her fingers. Even the boy standing in the doorway nodded firmly. Her brother's face hardened, but he said nothing more. With a muttered curse, he turned his horse and rode away. Clara stood trembling, but inside something shifted. For the first time, she had chosen herself, not shame, not silence, but belonging. That night by the fire, Thomas handed her a cup of coffee. His eyes were warm, proud. "You stood tall today, Clara. Don't ever let anyone tell you you're less than what you are." Clara sipped, her hands steady now. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The town would gossip, the past would try to return. But she also knew this: she was no longer alone. And for the first time in decades, she believed she could face whatever storm came. But storms in the West are never over so soon. Will Clara's newfound strength hold when tragedy strikes the ranch and force her to prove not just her place, but her courage? The Montana winter did not forgive. Storm after storm swept the plains, pressing against the walls of the Calder Ranch, making every day a battle to keep food warm and children safe. But for all the blizzards, Clara had begun to feel a hearth within her, an inner fire she thought had long gone cold. Yet fire, she would learn, does not only warm, it also tests. It happened on a bitter night in late January. The wind tore across the prairie like a banshee's scream, rattling shutters and making the very timbers groan. Thomas had taken Caleb and Luke into town earlier that day for supplies. Clara stayed behind with little Lily, who had fallen asleep curled up with her doll. Clara was mending shirts by lamplight when she caught the faintest whiff of smoke. At first she thought it was the stove, but then came the crackle, sharp, angry, alive. Her heart lurched. She dropped her needle and rushed to the window. Flames licked at the north side of the barn, sparks carried by the merciless wind. Within seconds, the dry hay inside would ignite, and if the fire spread to the house, her blood froze, but only for a breath. Then she moved. She shook Lily awake. "Darling, listen to me. You must stay inside by the hearth no matter what. Do not come out until I call." Lily blinked, frightened, but nodded, clutching her doll. Clara wrapped her shawl tight, grabbed the water pail, and ran into the storm. The fire raged hotter with every gust. Clara's first pail barely hissed against the flames. She filled another and another, her arms straining, lungs burning with smoke. Her mind screamed, "It's no use. You're only one woman." But another voice rose louder. "You've been told you're weak all your life. Tonight proved them wrong." She fought with the ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. Sparks bit into her hands, smoke seared her throat, but she did not stop. Then, just as her strength began to falter, she heard hoofbeats. Thomas. He leapt from his horse before it had even halted, barking orders to Caleb and Luke. "Get more water. Keep the windward side wet." Clara, he froze when he saw her skirts, soaked hair, wild arms trembling from the buckets she had already hauled. "You've been fighting it alone?" She coughed through the smoke, but met his eyes with steel. "I wasn't about to let your home burn while you were gone." Pride flickered across his face, even as urgency pressed them on. Together they battled the flames, Thomas with his brute strength. Clara with tireless resolve, the boys with desperate speed. For hours, fire and family clashed. And at last, when dawn broke pale and weary, the barn still stood, charred, scarred, but standing. The town arrives, news travels faster than fire. By midday, neighbors rode out, drawn by the plume of smoke. Among them was Edwin Blake, the cruel rancher who had once mocked Clara at the mercantile. He surveyed the scorched barn and the weary family. Well, he drawled, guess you'll be needing help. Shame Thomas marrying a woman who can't keep a fire from spreading. But before Thomas could answer, Caleb stepped forward, voice fierce. She saved it. Mama saved it. If not for her, the whole ranch would be gone, Mama. The words silenced the crowd. Clara froze, tears stinging her smoke-reddened eyes. She had never asked the boys to call her that. She had never believed they would. Thomas placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, then looked at the neighbors. His voice rang steady. This woman fought harder than any man last night. She kept my daughter safe, she saved my barn, and she stood where others would have run. You may call her too fat, too old, unwanted. But I call her my wife, and my children call her Mama. That's all that matters. The neighbors shifted uneasily. Edwin opened his mouth, then closed it again. The sneer on his lips could not mask the truth in Thomas's words. For the first time in her life, Clara did not lower her gaze. She looked each neighbor in the eye and did not flinch. That evening, after the neighbors left and the fire's ashes cooled, Clara sat by the hearth with Lily asleep against her chest. Thomas brought her a cup of coffee, his rough hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. You were remarkable, he said softly. Clara shook her head. I was terrified. Thomas knelt before her, his eyes searching hers. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about choosing to stand anyway. And Clara, you stood. She swallowed hard. All my life I believed their words, that I was too fat, too little, never enough. Last night, for the first time, I believed I had a place. Here, with you, with the children. Thomas reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. You are more than enough. You are the piece we didn't know we were missing. Clara's heart swelled. She had not been chosen out of pity. She had been chosen because she belonged. Later that night, when the children slept, Thomas and Clara stood outside under the stars. The barn smoldered faintly in the distance, a black scar against the pale snow. Thomas looked at her, his expression unguarded. Clara, I married you because my boys needed a mother. But now I see it wasn't just them. It was me. I needed you too. Clara's breath caught. For so long she had silenced her hopes, strangled her dreams before they could bloom. But here in the quiet of the Montana night, her heart dared to believe. Thomas, she whispered, do you really see me? Not as a burden, not as a duty, but me. He stepped closer, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. I see you, Clara. I see your strength, your kindness, your courage. And I thank God every day that you stood on that platform because it led you here. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of despair this time, but of release. For once, she allowed herself to be held not as a possession, not as a shameful secret, but as something precious. And when Thomas drew her into his arms, she felt not the hunger of passion, but the steady, anchoring embrace of love. That night, Clara slept deeply, dreamlessly. For the first time in 50 years, she was not haunted by rejection. She was carried by belonging. But storms are never the end on the frontier. What happens when spring brings new beginnings, and Clara must face the ultimate choice to step fully into love or retreat back into fear? By March, the hard snows began to soften. The ground once locked in frost loosened to mud. Streams broke their icy shells and rushed freely again, carrying with them the promise of spring. The Calder Ranch, scarred, but not broken by winter, breathed with new life. Clara stood at the doorway, one morning apron dusted with flour, watching Lily skip across the yard with Caleb and Luke close behind. Their laughter spilled into the air, pure and unself-conscious. She closed her eyes and listened. For decades, laughter had always been something distant, a sound she watched others enjoy. Now it was the music of her own household. She placed a hand against her chest. This is what hope feels like. Still, Clara knew there was one shadow yet to face the judgment of town. She had been mocked at the station, dismissed as too fat, whispered about in mercantile corners. She could not claim freedom until she stood before them again, this time not as the woman left behind, but as the woman who had built a home. One Saturday, she harnessed the wagon while Thomas loaded grain. Caleb and Luke climbed in, Lily perched on Clara's lap. They rode toward town together, the wide Montana sky arcing above like an endless cathedral. At the mercantile, silence rippled as Clara entered. Heads turned, whispers stirred. Mrs. Harrow, the butcher's wife, smirked openly. Well, well, the station bride survived winter, did she? Clara's stomach tightened, but she did not lower her gaze. Instead, she lifted her chin, voice steady. Yes, Mrs. Harrow, I did. And not just survived, I thrived. She laid flour and sugar on the counter, coins clinking from the purse she had earned through her own hands, mending, baking, trading small goods. Thomas stood behind her, silent but steadfast, his presence like a wall of strength. And when Lily tugged at her skirts and whispered, Mama, can we get candy? The word rang out clear enough for all to hear. The smirk faded from Mrs. Harrow's lips. Around the store, people shifted uncomfortably. They had seen Clara humiliated. Now they saw her claimed, respected, loved. For the first time, Clara felt no sting from their stares. Their opinions no longer defined her. That spring, the community held a barn raising for a neighbor who'd lost his roof in a gale. Clara baked bread pies and stew, feeding every hungry hand. When a child scraped her knee, Clara was there with a clean cloth. When the men paused, sweating from lifting beams, she carried pails of water without complaint. By sundown, no one was whispering about her size. They were praising her strength. Never saw a woman carry as much as you, Clara, one farmer admitted, shaking his head. She smiled gently. I've been carrying burdens all my life. This is the first time they felt light. Weeks later, as wildflowers bloomed along Beaver Creek, Thomas asked Clara to walk with him up the ridge. The sky was a wash of gold and lavender. The land stretched endless before them. Clara, Thomas began, voice low. I brought you here because it's where I once buried my hope. When my wife died, I thought love was gone forever. He turned, eyes meeting hers. But you, he paused, searching for words. You've taught me love can come again. Quiet, steady, stronger for having weathered storms. I married you first for the children, but now I stay because I cannot imagine life without you. Clara's heart trembled. For so long she had silenced the part of herself that yearned to be loved. Now, hearing his words, that silence broke. Tears welled, but her smile was radiant. Thomas, I never thought I'd hear words like these, not at 50. But I see it now. Love doesn't follow youth. It follows truth. And you have given me nothing but truth. He reached for her hand. Then let us make this our vow, not just of survival, but of love. Their hands clasped, weathered and scarred, yet steady. A vow not spoken in church or written on paper, but carved into the marrow of their lives. That summer, Lily, Caleb, and Luke gathered wildflowers and wove them into a crown. They placed it on Clara's head, declaring her queen of the Calder Ranch. Mama, you're ours now, Lily whispered as she hugged Clara tight. Caleb, shy but earnest, added, You don't have to prove anything anymore. We already know. Clara's tears fell freely. For decades, she had been called too fat, not enough, unwanted. Now she was called Mama, and it was the only title she had ever longed for. Months passed. Clara worked side by side with Thomas. She read to the children by firelight, mended quilts, planted a kitchen garden, and sang softly while kneading bread. She laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in years. The town no longer mocked. They greeted her with nods, with respect. Some even sought her advice. The whispers of too fat were gone, replaced by quiet admiration for the woman who had endured storms and brought warmth to a widower's home. Clara had liberated herself not by changing her body, but by reclaiming her worth. On an autumn evening, as the first frost touched the fields, Clara stood on the porch beside Thomas. The children chased fireflies in the yard, their laughter lighting up the dusk. Clara leaned into Thomas's shoulder. Do you ever wonder how different things might have been, she asked softly. He shook his head. No, I only thank God for how they are. She smiled, the lines of her face softened by the lamplight. Then let us grow old together, Thomas. Not with regret, but with gratitude. His arm tightened around her. With gratitude, Clara. Always. And beneath the Montana sky, vast, endless, forgiving, Clara finally knew she was home. In the end, Clara's story is not just about rejection at a train station. It is about what happens when one small voice, a child's whisper of mama, opens the door to a new beginning. She walked onto that platform carrying only her pain, but she left with something far greater, a family, a place to belong, and a love that saw her true worth. Life has a way of wounding us, of telling us we are too fat or not enough. But Clara reminds us that those labels do not define us. Sometimes healing arrives not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of kindness, in the steady hand of a man who chooses respect, in the innocent trust of a child who sees only with love. And perhaps that is something each of us can carry into our own days, the courage to look beyond appearances, to listen for the whispered word of hope, and to offer it to someone who feels unseen. If Clara's journey touched your heart, I invite you to join our community here at None, Wild West Saga. Subscribe, share this story, and leave a comment below. Tell me, would you like to see what came next for Clara and Thomas, or hear more stories of second chances and quiet love found in unexpected places? Because your voice matters. And maybe together we can keep these stories alive, the ones that remind us that it's never too late to be loved for who we are.